Nordstrom and Gap cratering today after disappointing earnings reports. Both stocks at new 52-week lows. The big move comes as we gear up for the most important time of the year for the retailers. And while these companies may be struggling with supply chain issues, our next guest says the consumer should be strong through the end of the year. Here to get us ready for Black Friday is Gerald Storch, Storch Advisors CEO. Great to see you, Jerry.
My pleasure.
So do you still stick by the winners? I mean, how have they been faring since the last time we talked, I think a few weeks ago?
Well, fantastic. I mean, it's very, very clear that the consumers are spending at an absolutely unprecedented level. You know, they're fueled by strong balance sheets and multi-trillion-dollar government spending. So when you look at sales versus 2019 over the last several months, they've been growing at about 20% versus 2019, and that appears to be accelerating to this day. It doesn't mean everybody's got it right. You know, a strategy that was weak before the pandemic doesn't suddenly become brilliant, and so I still would shy away from department stores and apparel stores. I'd be very worried about them. Meanwhile, you know, Walmart, Target, Home Depot, Lowe's, TJ Maxx, Costco, these are companies that won before the pandemic, they won during the pandemic, and they're winning now. In some cases, their stocks went down, even though they're great companies, because they didn't meet very lofty expectations. But I'd put any one of them into a savings account or an investment account for my children or my grandchildren. I wouldn't do that, as I said, with department stores or with apparel stores. I just don't think that they know where they're going after this ends.
It seems like a blanket statement on the part of department stores, Gerald, and I'm wondering if you see any difference for Macy's, or if you think that is also in the failing category, destined to fail despite the stock run, and it seems to be managing inventory issues through the supply chain pretty decently.
Well, sure, it's really interesting, but when you look at the bigger picture, department stores have already lost. All of them have either gone out of business or they've shrunk and lost significant market share compared to the companies I was mentioning earlier. They really are not a significant market factor anymore in retailing, but we like to talk about them. We all heard about them. There's still a parade, et cetera. What we did see was that Macy's outperformed a company like Nordstrom, and Nordstrom kind of blamed the supply chain, so did the Gap. But what's happening this year is that the supply chain has become the new weather. You know how retailers used to blame the weather every time something went wrong because it's an exogenous factor that you couldn't blame on management? Well, it looks like now it's the supply chain. How can Macy's report good numbers and Nordstrom not, and yet you blame it on the supply chain? I think some of these businesses have fundamental issues that they need to address, and in other cases, they simply have not worked their supply chain hard enough, diversified their sourcing. A lot of them are way too dependent on countries in Southeast Asia, you know, and they haven't been able to get those goods in ahead of time. Others have done that, but that's only going to help them through this holiday. I just want to point that out again. You still have the fact that millennials are not suddenly going to wake up from the pandemic and decide they want to shop like their grandmother shopped. They're not going, I'm going to department stores, I love them, you know, just because Macy's was able to get the goods in stock. That's not a long-term solution. These companies must reinvent themselves, and I would say they might be, you know, 10 to 25% of the way there, and time will run out as we get into years in the future.
I'm with you. You know, you mentioned a couple names that we've talked about forever, Costco and Home Depot specifically. The only concern, if there is one that I have, is people have piled into this, and valuation does not seem to be a concern right now. And these names have been parabolic. Is it too much, too fast, do you think, in a couple of these names?
I think that's a really great question. I'm not a stock picker like you folks are. You know, I pay more attention to the fundamentals of the business. Every one that I've named, I think, you know, that I've said as a winner is a great company and a great long-term investment. But there are three I'd point out that the stocks haven't grown as much this year, but I think they're still fantastic companies. One is Walmart. And I know every time I say people, oh, I'm not so sure, but the stock's gone nowhere all year, despite the fact they keep kicking the cover off the ball or hitting the cover of the ball, both online and in stores. And they're still the dominant grocer in the country, and nobody's been able to knock them from that throne. You also have TJX, the premier off-price retailer. When the doors reopen, people are going to flock there, and they will have no trouble, trust me, getting goods in this environment. You know, and then I'd have to come up with Amazon. For gosh sakes, the stock has gone nowhere all year. They're the dominant player, dominant, in the largest, most rapidly growing sector of retail today, e-commerce. No one is even close to them. Everyone else, even Walmart, is a fraction of their size in e-commerce. So you have to look at that company and go, gee, it took a little pause here. When's it going to resume that acceleration that we've seen for 20 years?
Gerald, great to see you. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.
Gerald Storch, I think he raises a very good point in terms of you can be a winner in the industry in terms of sales, et cetera, but not necessarily a winner in the eyes of the stock market in terms of stock appreciation. So Walmart and an Amazon versus, let's say, a Target, another winner, Macy's. Tim, where would you go?
Impassioned analysis by Jerry. Look, I'm long Walmart and Amazon, and I think both of those stocks are victims of a couple things. Amazon, ridiculous comps coming out of COVID, so through COVID, they finally cleared those comps. To me, that is the top mega caps tech stock. Walmart, look, relative to Target, it's underperformed at 40%, 40%. On a one-year basis. The multiple hardly demanding, and as Jerry pointed out, actually in a world where we have inflation, food inflation is actually a good thing for Walmart. And I think their ability to also be, a push people around on price continues to be the case, but they get zero credit for being an e-commerce retailer. Meanwhile, we know where Amazon trades. So like both of those trades, like Walmart over Target, not as a function of execution, as a function of valuation and performance.
Dan, I will not only ask you what you like in retail, but perhaps what you dislike, so we can open the field up a little more.
Yeah, I think Jerry brings up a great point about the disparity in the results between like a Macy's and a Nordstrom's. That was pretty interesting to me. I agree on the Walmart. I also agree on his TJX. I think that's one that's probably ready to kind of head back towards those prior highs. So you maybe have about a 10% move, maybe into year end. Also, I will mention, though, there's just some crazy moves. We started out talking about Gap today and obviously Nordstrom today. That move in Best Buy this week, that stock went up in a straight line, like 35% in 2 months, and then, gives half of it back in like that. So I just think there's a lot of really weird dislocations going on here. And then when you look at that Costco chart, please pull up that Costco chart. That's not normal for a $250 billion market cap company, which is not actually doing that much better than some of its biggest competitors. So to me, I just think there's a lot of oddness going on. And once we get through some of these supply chain bottlenecks or whatever, food inflation and all this other stuff going on, I think next year it's probably going to be a reversion for some of these things that have just gone straight up.